G'day guys, here we are again. Welcome to Life in the Peloton. I'm Mitch Stocker, and yes, it's Talking Luft Top 6 today. We're talking Top 6 World Championships, and I have got a really special guest for you. Before we get to that, the podcast this year is being brought to you by our partner MAAP. Really happy working with these guys this year, and you know what? We're on the eve of the second equinox of the year. Sunday, September the 22 marks the second equinox of the year, a brief moment of balance where we all experience 12 hours of light and darkness in both hemispheres. And MAAP are celebrating this moment. We did it back earlier in the year, and I rode all the way around Melbourne for 12 hours, 330 kilometers. It's all about getting out on your bike for a chance at global connection. Go and find rides near you or go solo. It's time to chase the light. It's going to be fun. I'm going to be riding from Melbourne with a crew all the way up to Lake Hume. That's going to be a really fun adventure just happening around the corner. Oh, I am definitely not ready for it, but it'll be a fun challenge anyway. Right now, we have got the World Championships coming up just in a week and a half. They are over in Zurich, in Switzerland, a really tough course. But before we get to that, let's talk Top 6 World Championships most influential with Rob Hatch. Well, here we are, Rob Hatch. This is special because we are talking worlds, but more special, talking with the big man, Rob Hatch. Mate, I can't wait to hear your voice. Hello, how are you?
I'm very well. I don't think I've ever been called the big man before. It's an honour, mate. It's an honour. I'm very well, thanks. I just got back from a few days at the Vuelta, helping our mutual friend Daniel Friebo with the cycling podcast. I've had a little break from live commentary, and I'm ready to go. Actually, this afternoon, the day we are talking, I'm back doing the Tour of Tuscany. So yeah, it's straight back into it and a little program to build up for the Worlds, eh?
That's right. It's just around the corner. It was a fantastic Vuelta of Spain. And look, maybe I'll just throw it out there. If everyone doesn't know, we've got a few Australian listeners that maybe don't get Eurosport or get some of the commentary. Rob, you are a commentator. You're the commentator on Eurosport. You've been a commentator for many years, a guy that I was listening to all the time when I was overseas because I couldn't get the SBS commentary. Now I'm back in Australia. I tune into the Aussie guys. Tell me a little bit about it, mate. What's it been like, being on the other side at the Vuelta of Spain, not commentating? Was it a bit weird?
It was actually, yeah, it was. I felt like a bit of a fish out of water in the mix zone, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was doing my best just to help Daniel gather all the audio. And from a pure sort of technical point of view, it was so useful for me to be back on site because, as you very, very well know, down under in Australia, miles from most of the racing most of the year. Nowadays, we don't go to as many races in terms of actually being at the finish line. So it had been a few years since I'd seen a few faces come through in the mix zone. There were the newer riders that I'd never seen face to face and had a chance to say hello to off the record and have a bit more of an informal chat. So I really enjoyed it, really, really useful. But complete rhythm of the day. A couple of days I found myself sat in the press room. And I'm trying to follow every kilometre, but I had to realise just chill, go and have a coffee, mate. Much busier before the stage and after the stage. Obviously, when you're there and having to gather that reaction and give the reaction. Normally, my job is in the months preceding doing the research, and then from kilometre zero right to the end.
Something really special about what you guys can hear out there now is your voice, the way it sounds right now. You're putting a little trick on us. You've got this fantastic microphone. I refer to it as the cricket commentating microphone. I don't know, is that got any reference to anything, or is that just because I've only seen it in cricket commentating? Tell me about the microphone you're using now.
This is what's called as a Coles lip mic. It was commissioned back in the 50s or 60s by the BBC to this company to make. And you're right. I mean, the first time I ever came into contact with this was as a young lad watching the cricket, actually. Watching one of my commentary heroes, Richie Benaud, and all of his mates do their thing on the telly.
Oh, what a ripper. And gone. That light roller would have about as much of an effect as a couple of koala bears doing the pas de deux. 2 for 22, New Zealand. It's 2 for 222. Well, something has got Greg Dyer, and I'd say it's probably the ball.
My dad actually used to get the used to record the coverage overnight from the Ashes or any other touring team that was there in Australia. And we used to get the Channel 9 coverage, actually. And they'd play it on the BBC overnight. And it was the same commentators. So even when I was a kid, before I even had this dream of being so fortunate to do what I do today, I knew what Channel 9 was, and, you know, I had sort of Australian broadcasting was sort of sports broadcasting. And then you'd see the famous football, soccer commentators using them back in the day with their coats on, you know, trying to stay warm in the stands in cold, rainy Great Britain. But now, because I broadcast a lot of the year from home, you can, as you very well know, you've got your insulated studio there that's sorted up and wired for sound, but the quality of the noise, the sound that comes through, I think is much better on one of these things for commentary. I've done stuff in professional studios around the world, been very, very lucky to travel, but I think the sound of the voice is much better than this thing in a room in my house, believe it or not. So, there's a bit of sound insulation going on here for when I do other jobs and voiceover and things like that, but for the commentary I use this thing, and I know you like it, so that's why I thought I'd use it today for you.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Is it drifting away? Is everyone still using it? Why is it not used more? Or is it being used all the time?
It isn't really, no. Even if I go to studios, it's not used. I think headsets are comfortable. You can use your hands and things like that. I soon get used to using something different. For example, when I do stuff from the Eurosport studio, we don't use these things. I think they're a bit old-fashioned for those studios now. These things are normally used more when you're in a stadium atmosphere, because what they do is they cut all the sound in and around out. So, I mean, I'm in my room now, and today, because, you know, we're not doing a live broadcast at the Tour de France, I've got the window open. The car goes past, you're not going to hear it because it shuts off the noise, for example. You know, somebody comes and drops the shopping outside and, you know, causes a fuss, whatever. I've got the supermarket down the road, by the way. You won't hear it. It sort of cuts the noise out. You can just hear me tapping the top metal bit now, actually. It sort of rests against your lip. And you'll have seen the pictures. You know, you don't really have to be into too much live sport to know that. You'll have seen the pictures. So, yeah, it's a very old-fashioned looking thing. And I've only really seen them used now in live soccer. Maybe in the tennis, because, you know, you're sort of whispering into one of these things. You can see them doing it at Wimbledon. And I think, you know, old-fashioned sort of legacy broadcasters like the BBC still use them for certain things.
Well, we're talking the World Championships. Let's get into what we're talking about. This is Talking Luft Top 6. It's a new idea that I've started up. It's something because I just love talking about all facets of cycling in terms of the old years. I don't just like focusing on what's going on right now. I like delving back into what the periods that I used to love watching and that what influenced me. And that's what the whole Top 6 is. The worlds are around the corner. So we're talking about top 6 most influential things that made us love the worlds. Maybe hate the worlds. I don't know. It could be different. Well, top 5 and one doozy, one curveball, one something different. You know, it could be something out there. I don't know what it's going to be. We're going to kick it off because the worlds are just around the corner. Just before we go, Rob, what's your experience with the worlds? You a fan of the worlds? You commentated the worlds. What do you think of the race itself?
I am a fan of the worlds mainly because it's different and it's quirky and it's a challenge for us to try and explain what it is to people who, a lot of people don't watch cycling, so their first contact with cycling is either going to be, isn't it, the Tour de France or the World Championships. And if you don't know what cycling is, you're going to think, oh, the World Championships is the pinnacle, the peak of the sport. But it sort of isn't. It sort of isn't. That's the quirky thing about the world.
It's weird, yeah.
You know, and you've got these guys and girls who aren't used to working in the same team for a whole year, and then they come and have to play together. I mean, that's not an altogether unusual thing. You get it in all sports, don't you? You know, you might, in the cricket, you got someone who plays for one state, for another state, and then during the Aussie winter goes and plays their county cricket somewhere, and they all come together and play. In the football, you know, you've got Manchester United and Manchester City players playing together, normally can't stand the sight of each other. So it's not that altogether that unusual, but it happens once a year. You might not know these people whatsoever who you're playing with, and you've got the kits that are different once a year, the venue's different. Sometimes you have world championship courses and parkour that certain riders can win, like sprinters. Sometimes you've got parkour that climbers can win. And then a lot of the time, which is, I guess, the real identity of the world, it's somewhere in the middle, isn't it, to make it sort of a race for the classics riders, if you will, whether they be hilly classics or flat classics like yourself. Very, very, very different and just a unique race, isn't it?
I'm glad you sort of set that up like that, because I want to I'm going to kick things off. I'm going to start first, if you don't mind. Richmond Worlds was my first Worlds experience. In 2015, I got the call up, and it was everything what you said. I'd been already racing for Green Edge, but I'd been racing, for a pros for about 6 years, I think, at that point. And I'd been in a Dutch team. I came across the Green Edge, and there was something weird. Like, of course, I saw Aussies around, but there was something so special about going across and racing for your country again. This being back with the Aussies, and for that one purpose, I don't know what it was. I just frothed on it. I don't know. I lifted another level. I didn't have the most ideal start. I actually pulled out of the Vuelta a España, and I actually was forced out. I couldn't make time cut, and I was a little bit questioning. I'm like, oh no, am I going to have the right form? I've been selected for this Worlds. I'm feeling a bit worried going across to Richmond. All of a sudden, when I got across there, I had this amazing form, and I just felt my place, this Australian environment. And I know that happens with all the other teams. You get in there and all the boys get back together and we just lift for this one goal. And I remember being across there. It was so cool. We had Micheal Matthews and Simon Gerrans, and then there was an internal team battle. Weirdly, I'm talking about this group sort of battle, but yet we had two leaders and the team was split down the middle. I was working for Simon Gerrans. We had another team sort of working for Micheal Matthews, and we both went into the final going, whoever gets there, we're going to sprint for. So look, on that flip side, it was such a cool environment for me to be in and feel this bonding being back with the Aussies. But now I think about it, actually, we weren't that bond together that at all. We had a split team down the middle because we had two leaders there. It was quite weird. Do you remember the Richmond Worlds?
I sort of do, yeah. I've just been trying to remember whether I actually commentated it or not. There was a period where at Eurosport we didn't have the rights because I think it was exclusive to the BBC. I remember doing a few for the BBC radio, but I've got a vague memory of commentating this from a studio. I know I wasn't there, and I'm looking at the results actually and seeing what you talked about, because Matthews was second, Gerrans was sixth, and obviously Sagan won. I tell you what, I've got more memories of this Worlds riding it on Zwift, I think, than actually commentating it, because it was one of the first parkours that were sort of real that you could go on, wasn't it?
It was such a cool Worlds because we went to America. You don't often get to go to America as a road pro. And we were all going down to Whole Foods every day. The hotel food wasn't that good, so we're eating our meals down at Whole Foods. We're slowly stocking the beers up for the after party. We're getting beers, craft beers, so we went back to the hotel afterwards. And it was a really cool course. 2 cobble climbs in it, really steep climbs. The atmosphere was out of control there. It just had such a cool atmosphere around that Worlds. And I like riding Zwift around that course. So much nostalgia for me because I'm going up that final climb. I remember looking across as I'm about to get dropped. My coach was there, who's living in America at the moment. He looks across at me, Ben Day, and he goes, "You're not done yet." And I was like, "Oh, I'm not done." So I pulled on for another lap and, set Gero up. It was a really cool Worlds.
Is it realistic, that course, when you ride around it again?
I think so. I think it really is because when we did the whole lockdown, I remember that we were doing team races. Our EF boys would go on and we'd try and race each other. And, while we had no racing, in 2020 or 2019, I think, and we did the Worlds. And I remember thinking to myself, yeah, okay, I've got to back off here. This is where I went over the top of the climb, and you got to keep it rolling before that next kicker, and you can coast in, but don't forget about that last climb up to the finish. It's a bit of a drag. From that point, for me, the Worlds, I guess it opened my eyes to what the Worlds was. And this is what I'm trying to explain is there's this part where you come back and race for your country. You get to hang out with your mates, but it's the atmosphere of it. It's all in for one day. And I love one day racing. The crowd is so electric. And you get this feeling the season's done after today. It's all these beautiful combinations of everything. Everyone's on board for this one goal.
In terms of, you said the season's done after that. Now, I'm a big fan of the Giro di Lombardia, Tour of Lombardy. Obviously, it won't naturally have been one of your favourite races, given the parkour, I guess. I can't remember whether you might have ridden it and had a job to do for somebody. You're shaking your head now,
I haven't done it, no.
But what would you do with the Worlds in terms of, because this is the eternal debate, isn't it? Where should the Worlds be? What would you do in terms of where you put it? Would you leave it where it is? Would you move it right to the end of the year? Would you have it after the Tour, like sometimes it used to be?
I like where it is. I like it's just a crescendo of the year, you know, and Lombardia's just there afterwards to sort of show the jersey. I think if I'd become world champion, I would have done Lombardia for sure.
Just to turn up, no, show off.
Yeah, just to turn up, get the jersey, you know, get the bike, the full kit, just the chance to get out there. Like, that's something I haven't even put down today is the kit. I would love to get into that at one point, but the chance to just go full white everywhere, stripes everywhere, kit yourself up, Lombardia. But I like where it is because it sort of sets up the following year. You go, cool, I've got a whole year to show this jersey off. You know, that's sort of the weird thing about national championships. It sort of changes over that half year period. I don't know. I like where it is.
Yeah.
You?
I do actually. Yeah, I've got used to it. Again, you do question, but I like the fact that you can turn up to Lombardy with that jersey on. That is one of the big things for me. Oh, we're going to see the world champion next week. Is he going to be wearing white shorts? And it sounds stupid. It really does sound stupid. It's such a basic thing. But it's just one of the quirky parts of the sport, isn't it? That I think, you know, you might, when you first get into cycling, you might see it and think, what's all this about? Really? What are they all fretting over a kit about? You know, no, it's just a T-shirt with a rainbow bands on it. But I think the more you get into it, the more you like its eccentricities, the more you like its quirkiness and those unique things, like you say. You know, it's that 2-week build-up afterwards. Are they going to go to the Worlds? What they're going to be working? What they're going to be wearing? All that sort of stuff. You know, what they're going to think. Things are going to be different. Things are going to look different, and it's sort of a little preview of what's to come the year after, isn't it?
Totally. It is very much. It's setting it up. What are they going to do? And, you know, the world's curse. We can talk about that later. But what have you got? What have you got for me? You can kick it off now. I've kicked it off from my first experience. What are you going to hit us up with, Rob?
I'm going back to 2005 to Madrid. And I've picked this one because even though I am a long, long way from being a Dutch speaker, I can just about read an article in a Newsblad and pick out the cycling things from in Belgium. But from where I'm sitting as a commentator, this was a legendary few seconds of commentary that I think even if you don't speak Dutch, but you've been to Belgium, you've heard it, you don't even have to speak the language to understand it.
Tommeke, wat doe je nu? Tom Bonen gaat wereldkampioen worden. Tom Bonen gaat wereldkampioen worden. Tom Bonen op één. Tom Bonen op één. Tom Bonen is wereldkampioen. Niet te geloven. Tom Bonen is wereldkampioen. 50 meter op kop en het is genoeg.
And Micheal Matthews, who was the commentator on the national television there, I was going to say the national television, I've just offended a load of Flemish nationalists, apologies for that. On the regional television station, the Belgian national Dutch language television station, there you go, the Flemish language television station on what we know in cycling as Sporza, or VRT is the television station. And he was calling home Tom Bonen, a young Tom Bonen who was just becoming a star. He was becoming world champion for Belgium. And I think if we're into cycling, we all know what a Belgian world champion means for the sport, don't we? It means it's going to get a lot more attention, that famous jersey, than anyone else. It's a cycling mad nation. Certainly when you refer to the Flemish part of Belgium, it is a cycling mad region, possibly the most crazy cycling region in the world. Some people, maybe in Brittany, maybe in Colombia, might argue with that. And he beat the home favourite, didn't he? Beat Alejandro Valverde. And I've got that image of them sprinting down the Castellana. And for those of you listening who don't know, I've resided in Spain on and off since I was a teenager. So it's an adopted home for me. So Madrid Worlds, thinking back to that, but more famous for me for the commentary moment and just, you know, Tom Bonen is world champion, Tom Bonen. And it's so simple. It is so simple. There's nothing contrived. There's nothing special. And it goes back to some of the great commentary moments. There's one in soccer and football, very, very famous. And the commentator says, look at his face. Just look at his face. But it does the job. It as a TV commentator, it relays all of the emotion. It tells you where you should be looking on the television. And this was the same. It was calling the guy's name and in a very special way, living that emotion. It was coming out of the commentator and it just added to the pictures, which is what all good commentary should do. I can think of a million in the cricket as well, you know, Warney's famous Gatting ball and the sort of consternation of the commentators at the time, the incredulity of it all. And for me, that's up with a great commentary moment. So that's why I've picked Tom Bonen, 2005 Madrid, after 273 grueling kilometres.
It was such a good win. I remember seeing it because Burnham actually was back a bit and he sort of weaved his way through. So calling him from that point, he could see it happening.
Yeah.
And in such a year for Burnham too. Roubaix, Flanders, Roubaix, Worlds. It was the ultimate year of Burnham. He was young, but he sort of achieved everything from there. And only recently, speaking to him last year, or earlier this year, sorry, about that year and what that did for him from that point. He had so much expectation from there and he had to overcome that. But I remember watching that sprint. Like you said, they came down, the bunch spread wide. There was probably about 20 riders and they all hit out. Burnham's behind. You can't actually see him until the last moment. He pops out and he does that sprint. From back in those days too, he had a different sprinting style. He had his head bumping around and clear set of wheels for the victory. Good one. Very, very good, Rob.
Yeah, and if you don't know the road I'm talking about, it's a big, straight, long road that goes right through the centre of Madrid. For those of you who watched the Vuelta, where the podium was on Sunday, it's just north from there, way up the road towards the famous Real Madrid Stadium. It goes right past it. It's called the Castellana. And it is a big, wide road, so there's room to sort of weave around, as you said. And it is quite a unique sprint because you could see them all just spread across the road. And you know, that piece of commentary takes me back to that image, and if I hear that commentary in my head, I can suddenly see those pictures that you're talking about and him sort of weaving in and around and coming from a long way back. So yeah, that is one of the great world's moments for me, certainly in the last 25 years.
Well, you mentioned him, and we're seeing as we're in Spain. Let's stay there.
Yes.
Alejandro Valverde. Now, this guy, he's the man of many talents. He's the man of the Vuelta. He's the man of the worlds, I say. He's the man, he's just a career racing until, you know, was it 41?
I'll tell you what, you know what? He's 44 this year and he's won 2 races in gravel. I'm looking on his PCS page now as you speak, just to remind me of all of his world results. And it's saying he's taken place in 3 races this year and he's won 2 of them. He's 44.
Oh, look at this. Like 2003, way back in Hamilton, Canada, he finishes second in the Worlds. I remember that Worlds because Simon Clark, same age as me, went to the Junior Worlds there.
Wow.
I didn't make that Worlds. I was dirty. I was like, I really wanted to go to the Worlds. We were fighting to go to the Under-19 Worlds. Valverde clips second off there in Hamilton. A staggering 15 years later, he wins the Worlds in Innsbruck.
Doesn't have the legs. It is going to be the winner, Alejandro Valverde.
In between that, he's finishing second in Madrid in 05, third 3 times, 212, 213, 214, Valkenburg, Florence, Ponferrada. And scattered through that, he's 5th at Richmond. He's 3rd back at Salzburg as well, 6th in Verona. He is just the man of the worlds. You remember those worlds? They're just... He was always featuring, like you said, in Madrid too. He was such a feature in arguably a sprint that doesn't suit him, a flat sprint, but he was just a guy that he had to have a hard day, a long day, such a classy rider. And that's the riders who win the Worlds. They're pure class.
133 wins in his road career. Incredible. And yeah, you can say what you want. You can mention the suspension, all that sort of stuff. And as journalists, it's very difficult to write a sort of balanced piece without doing that, whether you like to talk about those things or not. But when he was on the road, when he was racing, regardless of what you think about that period of professional cycling, I mean, his palmarès is absolutely ridiculous, isn't it? 4 years,
Yeah.
5 Flèche Wallonne, 3 times GC in Catalonia, 12 stages of the Vuelta.
I know.
He won a Vuelta. Obviously, there's all the other podium finishes where almost every year he seemed to finish on the podium. He won the Dauphiné twice, a couple of San Sebastians, 4 stages at the Tour, and a million other races as well. And he was winning right to the end, wasn't he? Let's not forget when he finished his road career. I mean, I'm looking at his last week of road results here, and he was top 5 in Emilia, podium in Varese, and 6th in Lombardy. And, you know, there was the mic drop after that.
Races.
Yeah, and he was 41 by that stage. There's a mic drop with that. I mean, it's ridiculous.
You can see why he might have got his arm twisted to do one more year.
Well, there was a story going around. I think enough's time passed to be able to mention this now. And I'm sure you've heard it as well, because I think it's one of the big off-the-record stories in professional cycling. It made it onto a few news websites as hearsay, but there was a story going around earlier this year that last year he was desperate to come back, and he was asking Eusebio, the boss, that he wanted to come back. But obviously, if you're the team, it's difficult to then go back again, isn't it, when you're trying to sort of forge a new identity? But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of hearsay. I'd say enough hearsay going around to suggest that it was true that last year he was still desperate to come back because he was just missing it. And he was in and around on Sunday as well. And you know, he's just he is a tremendous bike racer. I understand, like I mentioned before, why we'll have detractors in certain parts. But I tell you what, on a bike, watching him racing, very few racers more entertaining or better, I would say.
What do you got for me?
Right. Talking of more entertaining or better, I'm going here with a good mate of mine at a Worlds that I was far too young to watch, so I didn't watch it. I've seen the little clips, the grainy clips afterwards. I mean, maybe I'm doing him a bit of injustice here saying it was grainy. It's still only 1989, but...
oh, yeah, okay.
Yes, I'm talking about Sean Kelly being beaten by Greg LeMond.
Sean Kelly on his wheel in second spot. LeMond still in the lead, coming down the straightaway. Kelly makes a break on the left side. And on the right, it's Konyshev, the Soviet. Greg LeMond leading. His hand in the air. He's got it. The World Championship title to Greg LeMond.
Not happy at the fact he was beaten. But I also, I've been lucky enough to work with Greg at Eurosport as well. And two wonderful people who can still talk about it, thankfully, even though I know that is one of the sore points in Mr. Kelly's career, because, you know, you look at everything that Sean won, the only thing really missing, two things were missing, really, and I think he would be the first to say this. I mean, he's still a tremendous
Was
palmarès.
it his last Worlds? Because it was right at the end there, and I'm like LeMond, 89, LeMond won the Tour de France that year. That was the famous year, and Fignon was attacking in that Worlds right at the end too, wasn't he? LeMond went across to him.
It wasn't his last Worlds, no, because I know he raced on. Did he finish it though? I think his last Worlds was 93 in Oslo, believe it or not. I know he was in Benidorm the year before as well, because he's talked about a few anecdotes from that. And if I look down at the results, I can't.
But this was his one.
This was his one, and this is the race that, you know, everyone thinks that this was his time to win it. And, you know, for anybody who doesn't know Sean Kelly, Sean won 158 races on the road, won a Vuelta, which for, you know, a man who was a classics rider and the number one rider in terms of all-round racing throughout the 1980s. And you think of all the great riders that were around at that time, the most consistent in all types of racing, the one with the most beastly consistent palmarès was Sean Kelly. And obviously Sean, for a different generation now, is famous as a commentator. I'm extremely privileged to be able to sit next to him for most of the year on the big races. He's 68 now, Sean. For anybody who didn't know, he won 7 Paris-Nice back-to-back in the 1980s, which is a record that I think I can safely say, even in this era of Pog, Rog, Ving, Evenepoel and all the rest, will not be beaten. 3 Lombardis, 2 Sanremos, including one in 92 when he was on his way out. He was retiring, he was finishing just 18 months after that he was finishing. A couple of Roubaix, 2 Liège. He missed out in Flanders a couple of times, and that's why I mentioned 2 races that he would have felt, I think, in his career that he should have won. Flanders, he was picked a couple of times. He had that great rivalry, of course, with Eric van der Aarden. But here, Greg LeMond, right on the line, you know, and he tells this story. And he's obviously a very good-humoured, good-natured guy. He's a lovely, lovely man, is Sean. But he used to joke when we're on the Tour de France, every time he got near Chambéry, that he'd come out in an awful rash because of the bad memories of having lost there. And there was one particular stage, actually, in Chambéry, we were all together. And Greg was on the bus with us because it was the year he was working for Eurosport. It was the year that Rigoberto Urán won in the rain.
Yeah.
When he was
with the stuck in the gear.
Yes, that's the one.
Was it? Yeah.
And I think it was the year of a green Cannondale kit, if I'm trying to cast my mind back to that. But yeah, I remember sitting there in the rain and we were joking about this, all of us together. And yep, LeMond narrowly edged out Kelly. And of course, it was a tremendous, tremendous season as well for Greg LeMond, because it was 1989, wasn't it? The year of that finish in the time trial on the Champs-Élysées. So a tremendous sort of legend cementing year for Greg LeMond, you'd say. But obviously for my mate Sean, it was an almost moment, a nearly moment in a career that was full of wins and successes. I guess, you know, if you have to have any regrets, that'll be one of them that Sean will look back on. But yeah, I was far too young to be one into cycling. Coming from where I came from in the northwest of England, it wasn't exactly the sort of pursuit that you naturally got into. You know, we were sort of much more a cricket and football region. But obviously, yeah, looking back on it since and hearing the stories firsthand, a legendary tale of the World Championships.
And what a year, like you said, Le Mans was on it, and Fignon was a real feature in that final group. Those two guys, it was, having just to hear it, that story. It's one thing watching it, I've seen the race myself, but there's another thing hearing the actual stories from the guys in the race. That changes the experience altogether. I want to completely change it now.
Go for it.
Go for a personal experience here. The Qatar Worlds are really, really weird worlds. And, I actually broke my collarbone sort of about 6 weeks before the Worlds. So I was trying to get there. I got selected and I was freaking out trying to get ready. We're doing all this heat chamber stuff. And I was a bit scarred from the Tour of Qatar. I knew it was going to be crosswinds and everyone was talking about the crosswinds. But everyone was talking about the corner at 176 kilometres to go. And it was such a weird race. We rolled out.
Was it the only corner in the race?
There was 2 corners in the race, and we were just rolling along. And it was so weird. The brake rolled off. That's one thing I haven't mentioned too, is like the brake rolls away at the World Championships. Because you've got all these different nations there, the brake just rolls. No one wants to be in the brake. There's no attacking period. And we went away, we rolled away, the break got like 8 minutes or something, and then all of a sudden, it was an almighty lead out for this one corner. There were teams peeling, and there's 170k to go. We're peeling, we turn right, and then Great Britain put it in the gutter, and it was a fight. And I remember just in front of me, 3-4 wheels in front, Caleb Bjorn, he couldn't hold the wheel, and the gap formed. All of a sudden, I was in the second group. The front group rode away, but the 2 groups kept riding. And we rode about 5 minutes behind the front group. Behind us was an ultimate implosion. There was 54 riders that finished that day. I was one of them. I was there with Zach Dempster in the second group, and we rode 5 minutes behind in this loop at the end in Doha. And we could see the front group. They could see us. It was almost like, hey, you're not going to catch us. Anytime you accelerate, we'll accelerate. Anytime you ease off, we'll ease off. It was such a bizarre race. And it was Sagan second. I was following in the footsteps of Peter Sagan, in my Worlds experience. That Qatar Worlds, in a weird way, was sort of cool that it happened that way. I'm not going to say I would want it to happen every year. I don't know, what was it like to view that race?
Do you know what? I wasn't working on that Worlds, and I do remember where I was because it was such a peculiar race. I was on holiday. I was in Cyprus, actually. And I remember being by the swimming pool and going into sort of this TV room to watch a little bit of it. So I thought, obviously, you're on a holiday, but as a commentator, you need to know what happens in every race. So when we're not commentating, we often watch it anyway. So that's World Championships, so I'm going to go in and watch it. And I was with a friend, and do you know what? There's this sort of modern craze about darts. I'm not into it. I don't get it. I don't get the darts. I can't be doing with the sort of the rowdy sort of stuff, and all the sort of singing as if you were in the sort of, I don't know, in the Stretford end or something at Man United. And I said that as a big football fan. I just find it a strange atmosphere. But anyway, each to their own. I thought there was a dartboard there, so we'll have a play. So me and a mate, we were actually trying to play darts very poorly whilst watching these Worlds. And yeah, I remember something like 400 metres climbing over 260k. Like, just ridiculously flat. I mean, what's it like? I mean, I suppose there is a different obstacle in the shape of the wind. That's your climbs, really, isn't it? That's the obstacle.
Well, we only had this 10k period where it was crosswind. It was headwind out. We turned right. It was crosswind for about 10, 15k. I could be wrong. It wasn't long. And then we turned right again, and then we went all the way back in. And then we had a gale force tailwind. So it was just like everyone knew nothing's going to happen until we get to this point. And that was it. And a lot of guys' rides were over in that one turn. I remember the heat was such a factor because when we used to do Tour of Qatar, it was much earlier in the year and the temperatures were warm, but they were like mid-20s, high 30s, late 20s maybe. But this was, high 40s, mid-40s. And I remember all the heat treatment training you did before there. On the morning of the race, we laid in an ice bath before we went out there to cool the bodies down, put our kit on, and then, try to hang on to as much coolness as we can. So that was an element too. And again, I went on to do Abu Dhabi. It was at the end of the year that year. So I did a whole big Middle East period. Quite a weird world. It's like it was something to experience, but Yeah, I thought that was an interesting one to bring up. Have you got anything on your next one?
Well, just to stay on that one a minute, because I mentioned him earlier. This was Tom Bonan's last big chance to win the Worlds as well, wasn't it? Because he was on the podium. And I can't help watching it back sometimes and thinking, do you know what, he should have won that one.
Well, what about Tom Leeser? Do you remember that?
Yes.
Tom Leeser attacked. He just did the flyer at 2K to go.
Another big attack comes, and it comes from Leeser of the Netherlands. Someone has got to react now, otherwise this is the winning attack. They all look at each other. Is this the winning attack? Leeser of the Netherlands going clear of this world title. You can't give anyone a few seconds. You've got to do something.
And everyone's watching it going, I think Tom Leeser's going to be world champion.
That really would have been one of the stories for the ages, wouldn't it? Dearie me.
It was just strange because it was so small, the group. They were so long together that they just sort of were catting a mouse, and there was no need to ride. Like I said, they only had to go as fast as the group behind, which was our group, and we'd lost all steam. No one really needed to get back. We're all represented up there. So it's this big roll around for probably like 100K, and then Leeser hit them and was like, I think he's got it. But ultimately, I think Cavendish was second.
Cavendish was second, and he's another guy you watch it back and you think, he should have won that as well. And this isn't to take anything away from Sagan, of course, did what he did, winning those 3 back-to-back and cemented his own legend. But you look at Cavendish and Bonan and you think, woof. And from your point of view, Micheal Matthews up there yet again with another consistent finish. And you keep thinking that one day he's going to be Matthews' day in the Worlds because he's always there, isn't he?
But is it getting too late? And even in those times, he was starting to question himself.
We thought that about Valverde, though, didn't we? We thought that about Valverde. That's what I keep telling myself about Matthews. He is, on paper, he's the perfect world's rider. He is the perfect world's rider.
Perfect.
Yeah. And even now, he's added a different facet to his racing, that he's this sort of breakaway specialist guy as well now, when you see him in the Grand Tours. And if the right conditions came in on the right parkour, he could win one like that as well. So, I don't know. Keep your eye on Matthews right to the end of his career, because I think that, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but it could well happen, couldn't it? He's always there or thereabouts. Right then, let's move on then.
Go on. Yeah, go on.
Because I'm going to go now with a move, an attack, that I think sort of ushered in a new style of racing. It was one of the moments towards the end of the last decade, just before the pandemic, where we started getting these long-range attacks. One of them, you can think back to Tour of Flanders, Philippe Gilbert from a million miles away, going away and taking it home. But this was another step. This was something completely different. Yorkshire, by the way, being from Lancashire in northwest England, it pains me to say that word, were the big rivals. But it was, remember, a rainy Worlds, wasn't it, around Harrogate, beautiful spa town in the north of Yorkshire. Very posh place, actually. Far too posh for me. But it was colonised by fans from around the world, wasn't it, for a whole week. And Annemiek van Vleuten really driving home Dutch dominance. But there was a sort of a team element in the early part of this, because if you think to, 120 Ks to go or something stupid, like ridiculous numbers, they were attacking.
I think it was.
We had.
Well, wasn't there a climb? Like they had a big climb at like 100K to go.
Well, 105 Ks to go, I think, and they were riding it as if it was like the last climb, as if you were coming up to the Paterberg in Flanders or something like that, or maybe even, I don't know, just before that, the last Quaremont, something like that. And it was a bit like a lead up, but before then we'd had attacks from Floris Mackay, from Van der Breggen, and then suddenly at about 105, 104 to go, Annemiek van Vleuten, already sort of in the latter stage of her career. Remember, she started a bit late, didn't she? But she went.
She's desperately now really putting the pressure on, and Lizzie can't go with the acceleration of Annemiek van Vleuten. This race is now cracking, and Van Vleuten is just riding away.
She went, and the gap got bigger and bigger and bigger. And suddenly the peloton behind was in pieces. You had Dijknen, who was the home favourite from Yorkshire, desperately trying to follow her. She was one of the stronger riders in the race. Dijkert from the United States was there as well.
Yeah.
But out the front, Van Vleuten's gap sort of stayed where it was, and you're still thinking, she'll be caught. There's 100 Ks to go yet. Another 20 Ks go by. No, they'll get her. They'll work together. And it carries on. And she comes into the last sort of circuit, and in the last 20K, the gap suddenly ballooned to almost 3 minutes, and And it's great. She's tossing bidons to the crowd. She's sort of pointing to her earrings. She's, going on. She's celebrating. She'd already pulled off an absolutely heroic feat.
And this time it goes to the former world time trial champion, who has just ridden the rest of the women's peloton completely away in another race. Van Vleuten wins the world title with over 100 kilometres in the lead.
And for me, it sort of ushered in this new era of what we've seen from the Van der Poels of this world and people like that, just attacking from a million miles, and us back then, just 5 years ago, thinking no chance. And yeah, I thought that she really opened the door to a brand new era there in 2019. And Annemiek van Vleuten, she since, pulled off some fantastic exploits before she retired last year as well, didn't she?
That's a really, really good shout, because I remember watching that attack. I was there. I was doing the men's race that year, and I was lying on the bed watching that race, and they had some reasonably better weather than we did.
Yes.
And I remember launching the attack, and Lizzie was in her wheel, and you could see she was trying to follow. She literally got ridden out of the wheel. That's how hard she was attacking. It wasn't just like a surprise attack or something. And then the Dutchies ended up getting 1-2, didn't they? Didn't Van der Breggen get second?
Yeah. And she came in 2 minutes 15 down. So it tells you that gap that she initially got held at, 40 seconds a minute for a long, long time. And then it just ballooned when all the power went behind. And as you say, Van der Breggen was able to attack after that, take the second place. And it was Australia took the third place. It was Amanda Spratt took third place. She was at about 2.5 minutes, something like that.
The atmosphere was incredible there. And even when we raced the next day in the rain, the atmosphere was still there. I couldn't believe it. Like, that was, I know you're probably going to hurt you to say it, but they did a good Worlds there.
No, I was just saying, it was a tremendous Worlds. I was actually up during the early part of the week doing some work there for a few days. I remember it well because I was on crutches at the time. I'd made a mess of myself on my bike during the Welter in London on a rest day ride, which is a story for another day. And I was up there, all sort of a few bandages on my face, doing a couple of events, going around my crutches. I remember being stood by the barriers at that finish line on the hill, past Betty's tea room, where Mark Cavendish very famously sort of crashed out on the opening stage of the Tour de France, and where I'd commentated from for, I think it was the BBC back then, 2014. So I had sort of big, strong cycling memories of the crowds in Harrogate, and no, they didn't disappoint. It was tremendous. All the way from the start that day was in Bradford, I think, for the women's race. Maybe it was York for the men's, or I might get that wrong, but it was
York.
Was
York,
it down in York? Yeah. But Bradford for the women's race. Obviously some big climbs along the way, the little climbs on the circuit, another one that you can ride on the internet and go around. I've ridden around a few times, and again, I know it's nothing like racing, and I wouldn't even be able to dream of getting to your guys' speeds, but it's a difficult, tough, grippy course, isn't it? And to hold out that advantage and then just blow everyone out the water, I would say that's one of the world's performances of all time from Annemiek van Vleuten.
Yeah, that's a really good call. I love it. Well, I am going to do just a real quick one, and I've already touched on two of his wins, but we can't ignore Peter Sagan.
No.
3 in a row. Bergen, 2017, of course, 2015 Richmond, 2016 Doha, we spoke about before, 2017 Bergen. It wasn't looking like it was going to be one for him. Micheal Matthews was up there again. I was working for Michael. A tough little climb, 5-minute climb he had to get over, and a small group went into the finish. And look, I think Sagan, this new era, he was almost the start of this new sort of, I want to just call it freaks. These freaks that came around, and these guys who could just do like crazy stuff. Yeah. They could sprint, they could climb. I went through my career with Sagan, and then these guys came at the end of my career and so on. We've seen this explosion of these riders, but there doesn't need to be a long story about him. It's almost like an acknowledgement that 3 in a row hasn't been done ever before. Will it ever be done again? We don't know.
No, I don't think it's impossible, but it is certainly difficult, isn't it? I mean, one, you have to be a rider, as you say, who can do a bit of everything, because it's very unlikely that you're going to get 3 years in a row that has the same type of profile that's really going to suit you down to the ground. Certainly now our audiences watch every kilometre, and I think the organisers have to think that little bit more about, okay, we've got to be different this year. We've got to take it somewhere different. We've got to have this. We've got to have that. So I don't know. I mean, you could think about in the men's division, Van Aert, if he were ever to win it, could do it 3 times. Van der Poel, keep your eye on him, of course. He won last year. He's the sort of rider, I think, who's, again, should be a perfect world championship rider for many parkours. But when it gets to the hillier end, if Pogacar and company turn up. I mean, Pogacar's the man who you could think who could do it, but then again, you'd have to have a year where there wasn't a flat sprint, wouldn't you? And obviously Sagan was capable of winning that, wasn't he? So it is very difficult to see it being done.
It's the thing, like, you know what I mean? Like, Richmond was just sort of the cobbles, sort of classics course. You got Doha, which is a complete pan flat. And Bergen, yeah, again, it's, I guess, similar to Richmond. So, those two sort of suited him there. But with the Doha in the mix, I don't know. Look, it was just a quick acknowledgement to Sagan there. Look, you've probably got two left. I've still got one left in my bank before we go to our doozy. What do you got for your last couple?
Where am I going next? Right, I'm going to go. I'm going to stick with the... I'm going to go back in time. I've got two more. I've got them in front of me. I'm going to go back in time because we talked about Yorkshire, and I'm going to go back to a British memory. Sorry, Australian listeners. And Mark Cavendish.
Cavendish has made his way through. Oh, he's done it. Cavendish has done it. He's going to be the world champion. Oh, it's yes. Mark Cavendish is the world champion.
I think if you know me a little bit, you probably know that I'm the least patriotic person in the world, actually. I'm not really into flag waving so much. I'm not particularly proud to be from anywhere because I think I've lived in a lot of different places, but maybe that's sort of because of, where I've been, where I've lived, that sort of thing. A product of the environment rather than anything else. But because of what it meant to British cycling, Mark Cavendish,
Yeah.
It marked an era, didn't it? Because it was in the era where you saw the start of the Tour de France wins. Mark Cavendish had come along and had started to do his thing at the Tour de France, which of course has culminated this summer in doing what he did with the 35th and record-breaking stage win. He'd won San Remo when he first came on the scene, but of course this was the race that was going to sort of make him a huge star in the eyes of the national public that wasn't into cycling. Because as we said right at the start of this podcast, the World Championships is something that even if you aren't into the sport and its intricacies and, quirky sort of realities, if you don't know what the calendar's like or anything about racing, you're going to switch on the news in the night and listen to the fact that Mark Cavendish has won the World Championships. And you're going to think that it's a big thing. And he is certainly then going to become a national star in the eyes. And it was the first time that a British man had won the World Championship since Tom Simpson. And anybody who knows cycling knows his story and the tragic ending to it, but everything that he achieved then back in the 60s. So this was a huge, huge moment. And Mark Cavendish, at the end of a day where the team controlled, every rider sort of did their bit. And then the plan came together in what would have been a very sort of pressure-filled, worrying final kilometre. It was... a classic sort of sprint day, wasn't it? You can think about the old-fashioned traditional Tour de France sprint days. And Mark Cavendish there winning Copenhagen, wasn't it? Back in the day, 2011.
It was such a controlled race by the Brits. And I remember watching that. And I was on the cusp of going to that Worlds, went to the camps and things like that. And I was even honoured to even be considered. I was like, well, this is such a big project. I remember the project from Australia. We were going for Matt Goss, the head-to-head battle, Gossie versus Cav. And there was all in one project. I love that when they're just all in for this one sprint. And Great Britain, they just started riding from the start. They just didn't care. Like, we're riding, and they just wound it up. Wigo was there, Cummings. I'm just off the top of my head, the other riders who were there. But as they came to lead out, Australia did the lead out. We hit out.
Yeah.
We were waiting in the wings. And then we hit out and Matt Goss went for it.
Australia actually had a 9-man team. They'd qualified an extra rider. I'm looking down. There's a 9-man team. CJ Sutton, Mick Rogers, O'Grady, Heyman, Hausler.
Hino did the lead out.
Yeah. Goss, as you mentioned, doing the sprint. There was Gerrans, there was Baden Cook, Clark. I mean, what a squad that is. And then
the GB squad?
Well, I'm looking at it now. You mentioned Cummings. Chris Froome actually rode for Great Britain that day, which escapes my memory completely. There was Jeremy Hunt, David Miller, Ian Stannard, Geraint Thomas, and the aforementioned Wiggins as well. So not a bad side either. But there were some tremendous teams. I'm looking at the German team as well. Seeberg, Martin, Knees, Clear, Kittel, Hondo, Greipel, of course, who did the sprint. There's the big engine in Big Bert Grabsch and the young John Degenkolb as well. I mean, that might actually be the contender for the strongest squad there when you look down. It's ridiculous.
It's just insane. I love that. And I love that Worlds because, look, we didn't get there, but it was just the big lead-outs, the big teams, or everyone in for the one goal. I love that where it's just like, cool, we're doing the big lead-out. Look, I'm a sprinter at heart. I love doing the lead-outs. So I love those Worlds that had the big lead-outs.
No, tremendous. I mean, I'm just looking at all the other teams as well. Just tremendously strong start list. And wow. It's actually, when you look at that, it's amazing that there was so much control. But then again, if you look at the flip side of that, if you look at exactly where, everybody finished, so many teams wanted the same things, didn't they? They wanted that sprint. They wanted that opportunity for Goss, as you mentioned, for Greipel and for the other sprinters as well.
Well, I've got to go from that. I've really got to just keep going on that angle. Do you mind if I just slot straight in with something else?
Go for it, man.
This is an all-time lead-out for the Worlds. I'm talking about 2002 Zolder.
Oh, look at the strength and size of that team. I've got it in front of me. Madre mia, mamma mia, I think I should be saying, given who it is.
Have a look at the size of the squads. Why did they have so many riders back then? There's 13 riders in Spain. Italy's got 12. Every team's got 12 riders. It's ridiculous.
I mean, it is. And I'm looking at the strength of these teams as well. Same sort of idea of what we've just been talking about, but different era. Larger teams, stronger teams. Yes, it's ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, I'm looking at the Aussie team as well for you guys.
I'm speaking about the winner, Mario Cipollini.
Yeah.
And the lead out starts from 100k out. It's ridiculous. You got Paolo Bettini there. You got Bortolome. You've got Cipollini. De Luca was sort of around there floating around. Who knows what he did? But for me, the biggest job, the most important job was Alessandro Patacchi. He starts the lead out at 2.5k to go. And then he takes them in there. He takes Sacchi inside. Fabio Sacchi is the last man for Cipollini. He takes him inside 500 to go. I don't know how he does this turn. There's a big crash, 2k to go. So ultimately there's about 40 riders left. Australia, like you mentioned there, Australia had a super strong squad. But this is another conversation that I want to have at the end, is the collusion in Worlds. Australia end up having 3 in the top 13. O'Grady, Cook, McEwen. McEwen finishes second. Chippo obviously gets it, raises the big arms. He hits out. No one was getting around him that day, not with that squad. But Australia clearly not really working for the one goal.
No.
Who knows what was going on? I spoke at the start of the pod about the split team back in Richmond. It sounds like there was just ride for yourself back in those days with Australia.
Have you spoken to Robbie about it?
Did you watch that?
Because obviously Robbie McEwen was second, wasn't he?
I haven't spoken to him about it. You should speak to him.
Should do. Should have a word.
Has he said anything to you?
Not off the top of my head, no. I'm even trying to think back to things that might have been said over a beer or something. In Robbie's case, a glass of wine. He likes a glass of wine, does Robbie, doesn't he? He's a bit more sophisticated than I am. I don't know, something that we'll have to talk about, because I'm sure there's some great anecdotes from the day. I am sure there are some tremendous anecdotes from the day. It's
got to be. Like, when Chippo hits out, no one's getting off his wheel. It's a fight for second. McEwen gets his wheel. He stays in his wheel. Zabel's third. The German team was also massive as well. You got Hondo, Grapsch there as well. Andreas Clear was there. Sebastian Lang. There was just, the squads were massive. Aldag was even riding. It's a rock star. Like, I don't even want to go into the Spanish squad. Oscar Ferrer, he actually got caught back in the crash, I think. Or he was floating around.
Yeah, there's all sorts going on. I'm looking at the Belgium. It was a disaster for Belgium, wasn't it, as well? That home in Zolder as well. Best finisher, Tom Stales, outside of the top 20. But I mean, Cipollini, of his era, of course, and doing what he did, finish off the lead out.
And it leads into, for me, look, say what you want about Chippo these days, not a very nice man.
No.
But on the bike, he was all about the aesthetics and ridiculous aesthetics. Those kits were outrageous. And when it came to the Worlds, in my opinion, he did it right. He had the bands. He did the white shorts well. He rolled the World Championship kit very nicely.
Right then, from Zolder 2002, I'm going to move to the next one. And this is a completely different aesthetic. So we've just done 2 sprinting ones, and this, if I'm counting, is this my last one before we go to the sort of the Googlies?
This is your last,
right?
Yeah.
This is another sort of commentary inspired one, and I think an important moment for all of us, wherever we're watching around the world. Think back to 2020. we'd all had the strangest year for obvious reasons, I think, in our lives because of what happened and where we're all, stuck around the world, I guess. Imola 2020, the sort of hastily organised World Championships at the end of, I don't want to offend people by saying at the end of the pandemic, but I think people know what I mean by that. Certainly wasn't the end of the pandemic, but it was the end of the worst of it in terms of restrictions and things like that. Those helicopter shots, and I think they happened in both races, over the hills in sort of central eastern Italy, and suddenly all was right in the world again. You could see the beautiful hills, the vineyards, perfect bike roads, and the very best riders in the world fighting it out for the World Championship jersey. The iconic shots, I think, are of Anna van der Breggen, actually, in the women's race before the men's. They were the first time we'd really seen these helicopter shots. And if you don't know what I mean, go back and watch them, because the helicopter was about level with the top of the hill. And you could see over behind the sort of the rider, you could see the hills in the background. It was as if they were riding on top of the world, Mitch, wasn't it? Anna van der Breggen was there fighting it out. And we had the same the day after with the likes of Alaphilippe and co. But those images, the first time we'd seen them from a broadcast point of view and commentating races remotely after a crazy year for all, that for me was a moment of absolute pure elation and just a sort of comforting feeling that everything was all right again.
And Van der Breggen, she looked amazing in that one moment. She's riding alone. I think she went at maybe one lap to go on the decisive climb on the circuit. And she was exactly what you said. She was on that crest and the chopper got next to her and she was pedaling just beautifully. And she was a solo. It's almost like she's doing a commercial, yet she's at the end of the World Championships about to ride away with the victory.
It was wonderful. And it was another, by the way, while we're on it, another year later, it was swapping positions, wasn't it? Because in 2019, it was Van Vleuten who won, Van der Breggen who was second. This was Van der Breggen riding away solo the victory. Van Vleuten in second again, and Italy getting on the podium with Longo Borghini. But for me, rather than the victories those weekend, I mean, it was a motor racing circuit finish. I'm never a fan of those. But again, we were just happy to have Worlds, weren't we, I think, that year. And that shot, those shots, Van der Breggen looking so good on the bike, perfect position, class personified with a beautiful backdrop, and suddenly we had top sport, we had things going on, the world was moving again, and it was wonderful.
That's great. I love that. That's to close out our top 5. You want to go with your doozy, or you want me to kick things off? I've got a bit of a touchy one.
Go on then. I'll go on. Then you can end on that one if it's a special one. Here we go then. So if I look back towards, I'm going to give you 2 half ones if that's all right.
Yeah,
if you'll let me. One of them, I actually literally didn't know the result. Go back to Yorkshire, and I was commentating on the race, which is the more bizarre situation. Go back to Yorkshire 2019, and Eurosport did have the rights that year. But they had us commentating from the studio. We were working from the studio in London, and it was easier for them to have a bigger team in. And they had us in London rather than up in Yorkshire. I was actually only scheduled. I was sharing the commentary that day with Carlton Kirby. I was scheduled to only do the first half of the race, and instead of having to stay the other night, I hadn't been home much, and obviously I'd said I'd had a crash and I was limping around everywhere, and I think I had to be back for some physiotherapy back home in Spain or something, because I'd messed the ligaments up in my knee and all sorts going on. And so I commentated the first half of the race from the studio, and then I went to the airport. So I was in the air by the time that the race finished. And I remember landing back in Spain where I live, and just flicking, who's won? Because there were a few kilometres to go when we were taking off. It's one of those where you're getting towards the runway and you think, I've got to switch the phone off in a minute. I'm watching it, and there's a few Ks to go. And I was betting on Trentin. I'm going to be honest here. I was betting on Trentin. And by the time I landed, it's like, how on earth did he not win that? And just a completely strange feeling of having commentated on a race, but not knowing the result until I'd got off the plane later on. That was bizarre.
It's like you're saying before, you're on your holiday and you got to keep up with the races, and this is the complete opposite. You're like, I was actually commentating the race, and once I was out, I don't even give two two craps about the race.
It was bizarre. Again, it was just, I think on any other day I would have hung around and I'd have been there and stayed over at a friend's or at a hotel or something. But I know I needed to be back for having had this accident. I need to be back for some physiotherapy. So I thought I did the first half, got on the plane, and then when I landed, I had to check the result and then watch the highlights when I got home. The other half one comes from last year, commentating what was a fantastic men's worlds finish on the Glasgow course. Obviously, we all know the result. It was dramatic enough, wasn't it, with that crash? But what happened early in the race, we'd sort of settled into commentary, in this sort of modern way we have of doing things. We're all in different places, and if you've watched and listened on Eurosport in the last few years, Robbie's down with us from the Gold Coast when it's not the Grand Tours. I'm either in with the team or I'm at home, and we've got the studio lot as well. And suddenly, though, we were presented with this problem. I'm not going to go into the rights and wrongs or whatever of the protest because, thankfully we live in a world where you can make your point non-democratically, and we want that to continue. But there was a big protest, wasn't there? There was a protest about a climate emergency. And the problem was it stopped the race for about an hour. And the World's Road Race is long enough to commentate anyway. It's a privilege and a pleasure. But obviously, as professionals, you always want to do the best job and you always want to prepare. What we hadn't prepared was a protest when we didn't know when the race was starting again.
Well. So then, we are stopped. A protest is happening, we're told, on the road. I don't have any information about what it's about, but there is a protest on the road. And just keep your eye on the time, Gats.
And it was one of those old-time moments in a broadcast career where something happens, you're not expecting it, and suddenly you have to try and keep things entertaining whilst keeping people informed, whilst keeping speculation to a minimum, but obviously that's to a certain degree unavoidable. And it was a real test of broadcast technique, let's say, trying to keep it going for an hour. Thankfully, I was with top professionals who helped us along that way.
Had good stories to tell, and that's the thing, there was nothing going on.
No.
It's not like when it was just completely done, the riders were just standing around. It was quite a bizarre scenario, wasn't it? And when they started again, they really started.
They did. And again, during the pause, you're trying your best to keep it neutral and understandable and palatable to every taste, persuasion. Obviously you try not to let your own opinions get in towards things, and you're trying to be respectful of the situation without speculating, but then you're hearing one thing, it might restart, the police are doing this, the reason for the protest is that. And it's very tempting in this world of social media to go with what you think is the line. But if you you need several sources if you're being a proper, if you're trying to keep some sort of journalistic integrity, which of course we want to do, there's enough dumbing down of things in the world. I know sometimes people watch and get frustrated and think, why aren't they talking about this? Why aren't they mentioning that? It's all over social media. Well, unless you can caveat it and say, well, we think this might have happened, blah, 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 or you have, a very good authority and you can go with that call, then you don't mention it. But this occasion we were trying to get information and it was very, very difficult to do that, because there wasn't information around it. It was just confusing for the riders. I mean, remember that wonderful situation where people were going for autographs with Pogacar and Van der Poel, riders who were representing their nations who, realistically knew that they didn't have a chance of winning, but might have been in the breakaway and just doing their best for their nations. They took advantage and they're having pictures and selfies with the most famous riders in the world. It was a bizarre, but I mean, looking back on it, it was an anecdote and a story, wasn't it? And a part of the history of the world that we're talking about now. I mean, I'm mentioning it on this podcast, but at the time I'm thinking, come on, please, let's get going again. We've got another 6 hours yet to fill.
All right. Well, let me finish it off then. I've got one I think that just wraps up the Worlds.
Yes.
We spoke about it at the start. There's a bit of controversy. You come to the Worlds and you're expected to ride for your nation. And for me, I was excited. I always was, and I was 100% committed. And 99% of the time, it is like that. Well, maybe a bit less, 90% of the time. Or maybe a bit less than that, 80% of the time. I don't know. But look, there's one specific one that sticks out for me. 1985, Alan Piper working for Robert Miller. The Cross Nations teamwork, honouring their trade team. These two guys were riding for Peugeot at the time. And Alan Piper, obviously riding for Australia, didn't have a whole lot to ride for there. They had Phil Anderson, but it was about honouring the contract, the team. And it's a difficult thing. You spoke about that before. You're on the trade team. You're supposed to be then suddenly working against your own guy that you're working for the whole year just to help out your Australian teammate. But what is this about? You come in, and I can speak from the rider's point of view. You've got, yes, it's about pride and about sort of riding for your country, but there comes a point where it's like, okay, well, is this going to help me financially? How's this going to help me? You don't even ride on my team. You're going to benefit off this as a world champion. So all this comes into the mix. Look, I was never in a position to go, hey, look, you got to pay me. I was just happy to get an offer if one was on the table. And, this is what happens behind closed doors. Riders will go, hey, if you ride for me, it's worth this much. If I win, it's worth this much. Back in the day, and it's happened over the years, there's numerous examples. We remember that, we spoke about the Worlds already. Mark Cavendish saying that Bernard Eisel, who had nothing really else to achieve for Cav in the 2012 Olympics, did the big lead out for him. Yeah. Now we're talking about Olympics, but it's the same scenario. You come back and ride for your country. We spoke about the Zolder Worlds. Cipollini had a teammate who rode for America, who rode on Aqua Saponi for him. He came and rode for them in that Worlds. There are other countries that came and rode for them in the Worlds. So it happens time and time again. These cross nations in the Worlds to go, hey, you're on my trade team. You're in a country that's only got 2 riders here. How about you just ride for us? Have you seen this? Have you experienced this from the outside? Obviously, you'd know about it.
Yeah, you hear off the record stories and you'd never want, unless they're happy with that, you don't want to out those people. But I think even off the record stuff's not that easy to come by, certainly given rules and things like that. I think you have to know somebody pretty well and they have to be confident that you're not going to out them. I don't think it happens as much nowadays. I think the sport is more professional, and I think that the financial rewards now are much more consistent with not having to take that big bit of money or nice car or posh watch, whatever you've been offered. That you might have had to do previously. So I think that now there's less incentive to do that. I think it's a fairer competition. And I think that, you're not talking about these stupid 13, 14-man teams where you're needing to get a lot of people together to ride for you. But there is still a difference between the amount of riders that you qualify. For example, Sagan back when he was winning loads of stuff, Slovakia will get a big team. But then, you might see other people from other nations help him out. Now, I'm trying to think of an example that doesn't have a big team. It's difficult because when you're a top rider and you're winning year long, you're going to have enough points to get the team behind you. So it's the more unfancied riders nowadays that probably need that little bit of help. But like you say, if you're a top rider and you're winning UCI races, thankfully now, you are well remunerated. So I think it's a different scene now, Mitch.
Lastly, before we shut it down, this year's Worlds.
Wow.
Who's going to win?
Very, very good question. Given the parkour, given the form he was in at the start of the year, can you see past Mr. Pogačar? The parkour isn't exactly just to his liking, because obviously Evenepoel will be there. You got outsiders. Jorgensen's been riding well, hasn't he? But even, it's probably on the Mathieu van der Poel side of doable as well, isn't it? We know there'll be no Wout van Aert this year, which is obviously unfortunate and disappointing for him. But you can look at Mats Pedersen for Denmark as well. There's a lot of possibilities. Mark Hirschi's in good form for Switzerland. But is he on the level of those aforementioned riders? Probably not. If you have to put, I think the safe money goes on either Remco or Pogačar, doesn't it?
That's what I was about to say, Remco. I'd love to see Pogačar take it out. It's been a great year of him, and I'd love to see it sort of rounded out that. I'm going to go with Pogačar, and that's a very easy choice, but it's going to be cool to see it happen. Let's get in the world spirit. I hope you've enjoyed this, Rob, and I hope everyone's enjoyed listening.
I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for inviting me to chat, mate. And I'm building up now. I've got my little program for the next week and a half to get ready, and then straight into it. And I'm deep into the research of the parkour and that sort of stuff now. It's an exciting, different time of the year, I should say, and it requires a slightly different process of work as well at this time of year. So I'm really looking forward to it, mate.
Well, I hope that got you geared up for the World Championships coming up around the corner. Couple of classics there from over the years. I love talking to Rob. I love hearing his voice, and especially on that microphone. A big thanks goes out to our major partner, MAAP, and get yourself on board for the second equinox of the year. Get out there, chase the light, and go for a big ride. Try and ride for 12 hours, or just try and ride for as long as you can. Big thanks goes out also to Red Bricks Media, who put this episode together for you. And guys, if you haven't heard, we do have Life in the Peloton wine exclusively made with our partners over at Elderton, coming out of the Barossa. That is a beautiful Shiraz. Check that out at eldertonwines.com.au. Grab yourself a bottle, kick back, watch the World Championships. The Dirty Dockers around the corner. There's heaps going on. And until next week, I hope you enjoy the racing. Kick back and enjoy a red, like I said. I'll speak to you then. That iconic music in this episode was composed by none other than the legend Pete Shelley. Cheers, mate.